Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing ecology and management of bat species. Our knowledge about these cryptic species grows each year as technology and analytical skills advance. While we are losing populations at the local and global level, we're also identifying new species each year. Currently, there are approximately 1,400 species of bats. That's around 1/4 of all mammalian species. That makes them the second most speciose order outside of Rodentia. With all those species comes a lot of variety and natural history. The oldest bat fossil identified thus far was from Wyoming 52 million years ago. Now that we've been able to uniquely mark bats using armbands, we can study their lifespan and so many more aspects. We now know that the oldest bat on record was 40 years old. They mature and become independent extremely fast, so identifying age has been quite challenging. If we capture them in hand in the late summer, we can distinguish between pup and adult. But shortly thereafter, their bones fuse, and by fall, a pup born that summer would almost be identical to an adult. Adult females have an average of 1 pup per year, but some large-sized bats have been known to have quadruplets. Bat species living in temperate regions either migrate further south during cold months because southern regions have warmer climate with prey still available, or they hibernate. Actually, torpor would be a better description than hibernation, as they decrease their heart rate, respiratory rate, body temperature, metabolism, and immune response to a very low level for bouts of a few weeks at a time during cold months. Their winter hibernacula are characterized by areas that can maintain pretty constant humidity and cold temperatures slightly above freezing. These areas can be found in certain caves and large abandoned buildings. Since certain bat species thrive in winter hibernacula right around freezing temperatures, it's not expected that we'll find them on Antarctica. But with all those bat species on all those continents, you know to expect a lot of variety in their diet. We commonly see bats foraging on insects, but many of them specialize on pollen, nectar, fruit, small mammals, fish. 3 species of bats are vampire bats, meaning they have evolved to drink blood meals. They have many specialized organs and a complex social system of reciprocating blood meals with other individuals in their roost. The properties of these bats, and those species that can eat scorpions, are being studied for medicinal reasons and social behaviors. Some bat species have even co-evolved with the plants they pollinate so well that they're strongly dependent on each other. Earlier, I mentioned bat species in temperate regions as having 2 options for surviving cold months, either migrate or hibernate. Think of it as if your favorite food was no longer available. You could either travel somewhere you know still has that food, or you could change your diet. But what if all the types of food you could eat were no longer available? And starving is not an option you willingly accept. So you may reconsider migration or hibernation. We tend to see species of bats that evolved wing sizes and shapes that can allow for long flights in open airspace, selecting the migration option, while species of bats that evolved wing sizes and shapes that allow for quick movements of short flights to select the hibernation option. In our mid-Atlantic area, this typically means that our larger size bats, like red, hoary, silver-haired, and evening bats, tend to migrate south for winter, while our smaller size bats, little brown, tricolored, Indiana, eastern small-footed bats, tend to move towards the caves near our mountains to hibernate. But someone's got to buck the trend, so we see the large-sized big brown bats hibernating instead of migrating. So you can't just assume that size will predict the strategy selection. It's important to know each species' life strategy selection as we're studying each bat species. For example, you wouldn't want to survey for the presence or absence of an endangered bat species in a mid-Atlantic state in the winter and think that the absence of it indicated low quality habitat, it could simply mean the survey was conducted in the wrong time of year, and that area actually provides great habitat other parts of the year. So who's responsible for managing bat populations? In the US, each state agency has the responsibility of managing wildlife populations. Federal agencies are also involved, but the majority is done by state agencies. Many times, the surveys will be conducted by private consulting firms and universities. The majority of agency bat biologists and researchers meet at regional and national annual conferences to share their findings. There's also a new centralized reporting system where any bat researcher can upload their findings, so trends can be analyzed at a national level. Now, each bat biologist has their own preferences for studying bats. So the techniques vary widely, and that variety is taken into consideration as a covariate. Across the country, we're seeing massive declines in many bat species, so this centralized reporting system will only become more and more important. Trying to slow the trend and reverse it is a high priority as bats perform so many important ecosystem services. Pest species population control. It's been estimated that bats provide $3 to $53 billion per year controlling pests that damage crops. That means if there were no bats on the landscape, farmers would have to spend over $53 billion with a B each year in pesticide. And spraying additional pesticide has cascading effects on other trophic levels. Plus, that study was from decades ago, so today's value would be much larger than $53 billion per year. Bats pollinate fruits and plants like agave for making tequila. Major seed disperser, they can regenerate entire forests. Some flowers can only be pollinated by a specific bat species and cannot exist without that specific bat species. They're a consumer of insects, which transmit diseases to people and other animals. I'm not a fan of getting Zika, so bring on the mosquito-eating bats. Unfortunately, populations are declining around the globe for many reasons. Habitat loss in areas that are being cleared for conversion to ag, development, logging, and other reasons. Prior to 2000, intentional killing by humans caused the biggest proportion of mortality. They were killed for many reasons, such as considered being pests. They were eaten in certain cultures. Certain people wanted to protect their livestock from vampire bats, and certain farm producers wanted to protect their fruit crops, because remember, some species do eat fruit. Now, since 2000, collisions with wind turbines and whitenose syndrome in North America have been the leading causes of mortalities in the US. Now, I acknowledge the amazing benefits we get from wind turbines and the efforts to decrease our dependence on fossil fuels for energy. I support using renewable resources as often as we can. I am very thankful that energy companies are working with bat and bird biologists to find ways to mitigate the massive population losses. We know it happens, and R&D dollars are being dedicated to find alternatives to the design and placement and cut-in speeds of the wind turbines. Whitenose syndrome has been a huge cause of bat population loss in North America. It's caused by a fungus which irritates and damages the face and wing membranes, which, if exposed during winter hibernation, causes frequent arousal, and that means overusing the energy that was stored. The bats die of malnutrition and dehydration. In some states, they've seen a 99% loss of their cave hibernating bats. It started in a cave in New York State, most likely as an accidental translocation of a fungal spore from Europe, likely from gear used while caving at a cave in Europe. The fungus occurs in many European countries, but without the population losses in their bat species. It was a novel fungus to North America, so our bats had no immunity to it. The first winter, close to 100% of the bats in that cave died. The few that survived merged and traveled to their summer roosts. Then the next winter, caves a little bit further away saw the same phenomenon. We've now seen it spread over half of North America each year since that initial winter of 2006 to 2007, wreaking havoc on cave-dwelling populations. Many bat biologists are investigating unique ways to help bats survive, and it highlights the importance of learning as much as we can, as fast as we can. In Maryland, we have 10 species. 7 of them are common. Around half of these species hibernate in caves. So our small-footed, our little brown, our northern long-ear, our Indiana, and our tricolor bats hibernate in caves. Big brown bats, we see hibernating in caves and also hibernating in other areas as well. Then, around half of our species are living in trees and migrate south. So our silver-haired, red, hoary, and evening bat. But remember, the migratory bats are facing wind turbines as they migrate long distances. The winds that help the bats and birds migrate are also the same winds that help provide energy to wind turbines. So let's focus on Maryland bats. We have only 10 of the 1,400 species, so we don't see as much diversity as other areas of the world. Ours are all nocturnal, eat insects, echolocate for not only foraging on their prey, but also navigating to find water and roosts. They do differ in the insects they specialize on, the trees or man-made objects they prefer to roost in, what time of night they're active, how many pups they have each summer. Our smaller sizes typically have 1, our larger sizes may have up to 4. How far they travel each night, and whether they migrate or hibernate during winter months. Technology has improved, and so has our understanding of our local bat species. If we want to learn what species are in our area, we can use acoustics, the sound waves bats emit, to identify the species. If we want more than that, say capturing them to place a transmitter or obtain DNA sample, then we can trap them in mist nets or harp traps. We can track their nightly movement and their daily tree roost locations by placing radio transmitters on them and then releasing them. We can apply armbands with a unique ID and record all the IDs we see each time we trap and share that data with the other agency biologists, because each band has the name of the agency and a unique identification number. We can overlay the locations of all the bats we record into a GIS and run sophisticated analysis to model the habitats they're using and make habitat recommendations. Trapping bats can be done using harp traps or mist nets. Either way, the act of being caught is stressful, and we try to minimize capture and use non-invasive techniques when possible. Harp traps look similar to a harp, where there are 2 sets of monofilament lines running from a top pole to a bottom pole, spaced apart and adjacent to another set of lines that are slightly off-center. The bat sees the first row of lines and may adjust their body accordingly. So they may see the first set of lines here and rotate their bodies to fly right through the opening. But they weren't expecting a second layer of lines immediately behind the first row of lines, slightly off-center. They can't correct themselves in time to avoid hitting the second layer. So they fly into that second layer and then fall down into the bag unharmed. This works well in areas where bats are funneled into a small area, like a cave exit, or if you can create an artificial tunnel using plastic sheeting to funnel them into a small exit. Mist netting is when we set up a fine mesh net in the bat's habitat in such a way that we hope they're not able to avoid it in time, and they end up getting tangled in it. You can think of mist nets like stacking many volleyball nets on top of each other to cover a large area. We place them in an area where we believe the bats would be, like a stream corridor, and then we try to camouflage them into the environment so they aren't too obvious. And we select a spot where the bats can't go above, below, or to the sides. You learn about mist netting during a week-long training, and that training is required to purchase the nets. The training used to be provided by Bat Conservation International out of Austin, Texas, and now those instructors moved over to Bat Conservation and Management in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. BCM provides training many times throughout the year throughout North America. I highly recommend this training. I'm going to play some links to show how mist netting works. So this shows the bats circling, so they likely notice the mist net that's running in the diagonal of the frame. This one did not notice it and was not able to avoid it. Many others have been avoiding the mist net, but occasionally they do end up getting entangled. And then here's a video of how we remove them from the mist net. So first we identify which direction the bat entered the mist net. We go to that direction. We first work our way up towards its head, so we're able to control the head. That can prevent bites. We free the tail, then we free all of the fingers from one wing. After that wing is free of the net, then we remove the net from the other wing. And these videos were provided by Bat Conservation and Management and Sonobat from their YouTube channels. Now, once we successfully free them from the mist net, then we take measurements. Many times these measurements can help us identify the species, and they can help us determine the sex and age. Now, sometimes age is very difficult to tell. If you time it when the young, we can see their bones and see that there's a window or an opening, the bones have not fused, then we can tell that they're young of that year. But very quickly, they mature, their bones fuse, and it's very hard to tell a bat whether it's 2 years old or 20. So we write down adult. We also take measurements of the forearm, of the ear length, the tragus length. The tragus is that kind of soft, pointy triangle attached to your ear that adjusts the sound waves before they enter your ear. We measure the tail length. This is our opportunity to evaluate the bat's overall health. Or does it look like it has damage from whitenose syndrome? Does it look like it has any other health issues? This is our opportunity to also take samples. If we wanted to take DNA samples or fecal samples, we could attach a radio transmitter. So these are opportunities we couldn't take with just studying acoustics alone. We also monitor population trends. So we do that in the winter and in the summer. So many bat species are loyal to their winter hibernacula. So we can survey the same site year after year and look at the overall population trends. That can give us a clue into their growth or decline of their population. And you'll notice this picture I included shows a bat that is hibernating in an abandoned building, and I've actually seen them flatten their bodies so small that they can hibernate in the mortar between bricks. Many bat species are also loyal to their summer roost or bat box. So we perform emergence counts each year to also look for changes in population trends. If the population is healthy, we would expect emergence counts to increase around twofold 1 month after the pups are born, as they should be volant or flying by now. Some state agencies use citizen scientists to perform emergence counts, so anyone interested in participating should check with their state agency. I'm going to show a video that was taken near me in Virginia of an emergence count. This was taken by the Save Lucy campaign.
Come on, make it 100.
Before
9. 100. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
This was before whitenose syndrome decimated the little brown population.
11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
And
16.
These counts revealed up to 800 little brown bats used to live in these bat boxes. Now we've had several years of no bat use of those boxes. Now they're being occupied by some big browns. I also included some pictures of a radio transmitter attached to a bat and how we triangulate to find their locations. And also one example of an acoustic detector, which we'll go into shortly. Bat biologists must follow strict guidelines created by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services about studying bats and decontaminating equipment so as not to spread the fungus. We decontaminate equipment between each bat and also at the end of each night. Many times we're not allowed to take that same equipment into any clean states. So many times we purchase multiple sets of equipment so that we don't spread the fungus. With large concern over fungal infection spread, we rely much more on acoustic technology due to its non-invasive nature. Acoustic technology starts with the idea that bats echolocate. They emit an ultrasonic sound, so a high frequency that we can't hear, out of their mouths, and await for the echo to bounce off an object and return to both ears. They can learn the detail in that echo, such as if objects are in their way, the size and shape of possible prey, the direction the prey is flying. Then they can adjust their flight accordingly. Here is a video of a bat echolocating to forage on insects. And you'll be able to hear the difference. So you're able to hear the difference as it was speeding up the number of calls it was emitting. Then there was a pause as it was capturing and consuming the moth, and then it resumes. I'm going to play that one more time so you can hear the speed increase. Each call requires a large amount of energy, so they tend to echolocate more often when they feel the gain will be worth the risk, usually when they are actively hunting. They may echolocate hundreds of times per second while foraging, and they calculate the timing in each ear, which means they're computing hundreds of calculations each second. Their brains are like tiny supercomputers. What the bat does is convert the echolocation sound waves into a three-dimensional picture, such as what you would see with a sonogram. Then what we do with acoustic technology is use specialized microphones and bat detectors to record the sound waves to convert the sound waves into a spectrogram. In essence, we're spying on the spies that are spying on the insects. Here is a video that shows what a spectrogram looks like, and I'll play the call. So this is a big brown bat, and you'll hear that there's pauses between each call. Okay. You'll also see the harmonic or the doubling of that call. That indicates that this call was this spectrogram shows the entire call. And it's at 60, a little bit over 60 kilohertz. So we're very confident that this is a big brown bat. We'll get into species identification in just a little bit. Then this call is where you're going to hear the difference in the speed of the big brown bat. And so you can tell that it's calling much more frequently per time unit, and it's getting a lot more detail about the area. So this bat is likely foraging, or this is called a feed buzz. So you heard it speed up during the foraging event, and then a pause, likely due to consuming the insect, and then resuming. In a spectrogram, you'll see frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. I mentioned that echolocation requires a lot of energy. To echolocate hundreds of times and gain enough information to make a decision, they send out frequency modulated calls, or FM calls, spanning dozens and dozens of kilohertz. This is when they're learning a lot of detail about what's in the area. Then, if they don't need much information about the area, they send out a constant frequency call, or quasi-constant frequency call, CF. So a call that's sent out at the same frequency. This doesn't take as much energy and yields very little information. This is when they're most likely commuting to places they're familiar with, like their daily watering hole. You can think of it like commuting to a work or school each day along the same route. You don't have to make that many decisions. You just make sure you don't crash the car in front of you. But if you're traveling to a new area with new obstacles in, say, a thunderstorm, you may concentrate much more and use much more energy on focusing not just on what's in front of you, but also what's all around you. And then there are these crazy social calls, and we're still learning a lot more about those. This is an example of a hoary bat and how one bat species can have many different looks of their calls. So most likely call B is an example of a hoary bat foraging, since it's spanning well over a dozen kilohertz, whereas L is staying right around within 2 kilohertz. So this is likely when the hoary bat is commuting. It's important to understand how sound works. The speed of sound is the same for bats as for, say, thunder. You know how you can predict how far away you are from lightning? By the timing from when you see the lightning and then you hear the thunder. If you count the number of seconds and divide by 5, well, that math actually checks out when you're lenient with your rounding. So the speed of sound is at a constant 344 meters per second. Let's round to 300 for ease of math. It stays constant. So as wavelength decreases, that means the frequency must increase since the speed is always staying the same. So if you recorded a 100 kilohertz call, and that call needed to be twice as big as the object it was targeting so that it's big enough to bounce off and come back, then you can calculate that it was targeting a 1.5 millimeter object like a gnat. So a small bat may be hunting a small bat and therefore sending out a very high 100 kilohertz frequency. You likely won't see a really big brown bat or a hoary bat wanting to eat a small gnat. So this calculation only helps us narrow down the size of the target and likely the size of the bat. These foraging calls, or feed buzzes, only gives us an indication of size, not the species. So we filter out the feed buzzes and just look for the commuting calls. The commuting calls are pretty much a better reflection of which species called. How do you collect commuting calls in order to analyze and create a library? Bat biologists around the world capture bats, attach lightweight lights to them, release them, record their calls. After this is done tens of thousands of times, the computer algorithm finds patterns in the calls based on each species. The algorithms are looking at the highest part of the call of the frequency, the lowest part, and the knee or the inflection and the slope, and many, many more parameters. Then a key or library is developed. You can use the key manually by looking at certain characteristics of the numbers, or you can use a dichotomous key, or you can spend over $1,000 for the software program. Now, I admit no software program is perfect, but it does help a lot with narrowing down what species we're seeing. Let's take a look at how the commuting calls look for each of our species in Maryland, starting with the larger size bats, so the lower frequencies, and working our way to our smaller bats with higher frequencies. So let's start with the hoary bat. So it's calling around 18 or 20 kilohertz. It's flat, maybe has this U or canoe shape, and it bounces around 20, a little above 20, a little below 20, but this is going to be our lowest frequency bat. Next up is the big brown bat. To me, I kind of think of this as like a Nike swoosh. It doesn't have a sharp inflection point, so if you think of a hockey stick or an L, it's not like that. It's always, the slope is always moving. Now, one characteristic is the top part of its call exceeds 60. If you get the whole call, you can exceed 60, as long as as the bat is close to your microphone. The farther away, the higher frequency sound waves attenuate, and so you may lose the top part of the call. But if you get that harmonic or the doubling of the call, then you know you got the entire call. So here we feel very confident we have the full call because we have the harmonic of all these calls. So when we see the top part exceeding 60 kilohertz, we can feel very confident it's a big brown bat. Also, when we look at the bottom part of their calls, they never completely get flat, which helps separate it from silverhair bat. So a similar size bat, almost a similar shape, but this is looking a little bit more like a hockey stick. And these will come to a straight line, so a flat line. So also, the top part of its call does not exceed 60 kilohertz. Evening bats are calling higher than silverhair and big browns. So they're in the upper 30s to 40, and they bounce around a little bit above and below say 38, but at a regular cadence, higher than lower. The call's never quite flat. Our red bats have, similar to our hoary, this canoe shape or U shape. They're calling much higher though. So now we're up near 40, bouncing around up and down around 40, but no real pattern to it. So very irregular, which makes it easier to distinguish sometimes. Our tricolor bat. Now this is our first small size cave hibernating species that's very sensitive to whitenose syndrome. Now I mentioned earlier how the upper part, the higher frequencies, many times get lost as the bat is far away from the microphone. So many times we end up just seeing these dashes, these straight dashes, right around 40 or 41 kilohertz. That's pretty indicative of a tricolor bat. Our first myotis bat to talk about is our little brown bat. Now we can tell a myotis from other species because they have this tail. So it's kind of like there's a second slope. So we have the first slope and then it changes direction to form a toe or second slope. Little brown bats aren't quite as, doesn't have quite as much inflection in the call as our Indiana, but we also don't have Indiana in our area, in our part of Maryland. So very likely if you're seeing a myotis calling pretty low, so the lowest part is in the 30s, more likely than not, in our part of the state, you're going to be looking at a little brown bat instead of an Indiana. Now it does have more inflection in the call and a more distinct toe than our little brown bat. Our eastern small-footed bat can go up to 100, but we don't have them in our area. They have a very strong inflection, and their longer calls can exceed 5 milliseconds. Now, northern long-ear is our only bat in our area that exceeds 110, 120, 125 kilohertz. So when we see 125, many, and especially in forested areas, we can feel pretty confident it's northern long-ear bat. But still, we need to think about the habitat and think if maybe it was a different species of bat calling very close to the microphone. So we need to take a lot of details into consideration before we make a species identification. It doesn't have as much inflection in the point, and the call is nearly vertical. So we can usually tell northern long-ears pretty well. As technology gets better, faster, and more accurate, we do a better job at identifying bats in our area and learning about the habitats they're using. And as more complex statistical analysis gets applied to bat biology, we do a better job of modeling what habitats are important. Then we can learn what habitat features are important and can make better habitat recommendations. Educating the public is key, as much of the public is nervous about bats or unaware of policies involved when a bat enters the shutters, attic, or home. Each jurisdiction exercises their own regulations. Some jurisdictions will require euthanasia of any and all bats that enter a building, while some will require it only if there's evidence of a bite. It's important to know local policies, as some bat species readily use man-made objects. With the public spending more time at home than ever before, we're even more aware of our surroundings and that we're sharing our space with wildlife. We need to respect their wild nature and try to avoid conflict. It may be as simple as closing off all the doors to the house and opening a window so the bat can emerge at night. Each human-wildlife conflict is unique and has its own set of risks, and each person has to decide for themselves their own comfort level with the risk. but they should do so knowing all possible outcomes. And that starts with educating themselves on the local wildlife policies. I mentioned earlier how biologists are following the strict U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines about decontaminating themselves in their research equipment. Many caves housing endangered species or species at risk have also been gated to prevent the public from entering. The caving community has also noticed their possible exposure and has taken extra precautions. If you see a cave is gated, please respect it and don't enter. Or if you see any violations, please don't stay silent. Bats need our help now more than ever before. Being a bat biologist comes with a lot of requirements, besides just a deep admiration for those often misunderstood and underappreciated species. You need to have excellent scientific inquiry and an analytical mind. Equipment will fail when you're at a site in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service, and you'll need to find ways to problem solve. You'll be dealing with the public, many of whom harbor resentment towards bats, and you need to remain friendly and professional. You'll be asked to explain research and bat biology to many audiences, including reporters, so you need to be comfortable with public speaking. You'll be studying species late at night and into the early morning hours, followed by hours of equipment decontamination. And it feels like everyone else is just starting the day when you're coming home. You'll be working in all weather conditions with lots of bugs and water and mud. And you'll be working with a rabies vector species, so need to have your expensive rabies pre-exposure vaccine series completed before ever touching a bat. The vaccine series takes 3 weeks and is very expensive, but it's certainly better than the alternative. If you're really interested, talk to grad students in ENST and BSci, as we have many projects around the globe. It's likely your TAs and professors also have other contacts at other universities who are studying bats. Each region in the US has a working group of bat biologists. The Northeast Bat Working Group holds annual conferences each January. The Southeastern Bat Diversity Network holds annual conferences in the spring and also bat blitzes each summer. Well, maybe not this summer during COVID. And remember, bat conservation and management hold their week-long trainings several times each year. If you want to help even more, you can consider installing BatBox. Multi-chambers are better than single chambers. The key is to get it really high, like 15 feet or higher, near a forest, within a quarter miles of water, oriented south or southeast, in an area with 8 or more hours of direct sunlight so they get warm and toasty inside. Also, I don't recommend mounting them to a slick pole because pups fall often when learning how to fly, and mom needs to get them back in there. So a wooden pole or a tree or a brick is a better substrate for mounting your bat box on so that mom can climb back up with her pup. I hope you've enjoyed this and learned some new things. Bye.